Even though it was still winter, that Saturday, almost 3 decades ago, was warmer than it is today. I had completed my first semester of my freshman year as an undergraduate student at Culver Stockton College. And as I told you last week, I had been homesick and dissatisfied with my major most of the fall. Right before winter break, I had listened to my mentors here at home and at school and changed my major to religion and philosophy for a pre-ministry track. In short, I had accepted my call. I loved my philosophy course that fall. And as I told you last week, I hated my accounting course with every cell in my body. But I loved my philosophy course, I loved my new major, and I headed back with a new vision and excitement for the future ahead. The head of the Religion and Philosophy Department, Dr. Edward Sawyer, organized a couple fellowship opportunities each year, and I had been invited to the religion majors' pizza party at Pizza Hut, the only chain restaurant in Canton, Missouri. I attended and met the other students, including a shy, red-headed sophomore who was a multi-generational Disciples of Christ student just like me. We returned to the hill, as CSC is called, because it sits on the Missouri Bluff looking over the mighty Mississippi River. I'm sure we had 10-page papers to write, chapters to read, but the weather was decent, and I asked the red-headed girl to go for a walk with me in the woods, alone. She said yes. And 2 hours and 28 years later, here we are. Terry Rose and I fell in love on the hill at one of our disciples' colleges, supported by the Thanksgiving special offering. You have an insert in your bulletin today. We were still children when we married, barely in our 20s. Terry was a graduate with loans to pay. I was a student pastor, and we were broke. Lucky to have 2 pennies to give to anyone. We moved to Quincy, Illinois because there was no married student housing on campus. And I already told you that Pizza Hut was the only chain anything in Canton, Missouri. So there were no jobs for Terry in tiny Canton. So Terry found jobs in Quincy and worked. And I served as associate minister at First Christian Church in Bowling Green, Missouri, about 45 minutes away. And then my final year of college at Lewistown Christian Church as their pastor, and finished my bachelor's degree. And we were still broke. Very broke. We simply ran out of money many months during those years. Nothing in our checkbook. We didn't have a savings account. Nothing to buy groceries or gas for the car, even though it was just 88 cents a gallon. And many times, like clockwork, when our pockets were empty, an envelope would appear in the mailbox from an address in Kankakee County. Inside, we'd find a card with an encouraging note, updates on how things were going here at Central Christian, a bulletin from the most recent worship service, and $25. Signed, in Christ, Elsie. The sister of our beloved Betty Sebastiani, Elsie Menard quietly saved us from hunger and being stranded time and time again. The cards came almost monthly, all the way through seminary. And I have heard from other Timothys of our congregation that I was not alone in receiving her gifts. Elsie never wanted recognition for her gifts. She just wanted to be the generous servant she was called to be. And at the risk of embarrassing her, her sister Betty has done likewise in her own ways during the past 8 years we've shared together in ministry. Not the least of which was the many, many years that Betty served as our usher at the rear door of the sanctuary, greeting you with smiles, handshakes, and bulletins. And we thank you for that, Betty. Also, I'm at risk of embarrassing her. She would bring in treats for the Welcome Center after we developed that space so that you could have your honey buns and your hostess treats at the Welcome Center. Most of those for years donated by Betty Sebastiani, and she still does it, and I'm hoping you still continue to do that, Betty. We thank you for your gifts. And Betty never said, by the way, Robert mentioned that in worship someday. Betty never desired recognition either. Jesus was no stranger to the gifts of generous servants. Many scholars believe that his nonviolent movement for peace and reconciling justice was quietly funded primarily by wealthy widows. Wealthy widows. Traveling has never been free, and Jesus traveled a lot. Donkeys were not free. Camels were not free. Guides were not free. Groups of people didn't travel through ancient Judea without those things. Feeding a group of disciples was not free. There's a reason that Judas held the purse, that Judas was the treasurer of the group, because they needed one to manage the gifts from donors and to pay for lodging, to pay for supplies, and feed for the animals. Now, it's true, there were no Holiday Inns and Best Westerns back in ancient Palestine. But remember that story about Jesus' birth, how they went to Bethlehem, and there was no room in the inn, and the innkeeper let them stay in the stable? Remember that story about Jesus' birth? There were inns then. They weren't free. People had to pay. They expected you to pay to stay in their inn. So while, yes, they didn't have indoor swimming pools and free continental breakfast in the morning, well, maybe they had that. I don't know. There were inns, and they had to pay for them. And no, even with all the power Jesus had, he still wasn't growing money on trees. Right? So scholars, in their research, and we'll see maybe later a connection, have begun to believe that the source of funding for this movement was wealthy widows in the communities. Jesus was not a friend to the religious elites of his day, to the leaders of the temple who were getting rich in land grabs and through unscrupulous lending practices. It was the leaders in the temple whom you had to go to get a mortgage if you were in the people of Israel. They were the bankers of the day, if you will, the lenders. And those people in the temple were doing some unscrupulous practices. They were cheating people on their loans and cheating people out of their houses and land. Jesus was not a friend to those the writer of Mark identifies as scribes, wearing designer suits and demanding respect in the popular media, skyboxes in their stadiums of worship, and red carpet treatment at all social events. No, the Jesus of the Gospels held those in power accountable for stealing from the widow's pensions, from foreclosing fraudulently on the most vulnerable, all the while sending their meaningless thoughts and prayers across their social media feeds with photos of candles and faded flags and sunsets. Jesus cautioned his disciples, cautioned them not to be fooled by the fools, not to be fooled by the fools who claim they have all the answers, who pander in mistruth and hyperbole. He cautioned his disciples to not be obsessed with the celebrity of those who flaunt their riches or themselves, but instead to focus their hearts on those who celebrate the abundant generosity of God in their lives with generosity of their own. With generosity of their own. Not just in money, but in service for one another. Fully devoted discipleship is being all in, giving all you have to the glory of God. And as impossible as that may sound, let me assure you that it is possible with grace. With grace. When I was in 5th grade, I was in Mrs. Barb Edwards' Sunday school class over on Oak Street, newly baptized into the Christian faith. I was inquisitive, always asking questions, about things like life on other planets, Gabby. Right? Just simple questions that Sunday school students ask their teachers, right? What about life on other planets? How come that's not in the Bible? Right? Just simple questions. That summer, I attended Vacation Bible School and I met a fully devoted disciple who enjoyed my difficult questions about science and faith. A philosopher and an English teacher by trade, and the mother of my classmate, Jill. Mrs. Bonnie Flouhouse welcomed my every inquiry. Bonnie encouraged me to think, to discover, and in her eloquent way, to express myself with courage and with grace. With courage and with grace. Bonnie was generous with her time, her talents, and her resources for Central Christian Church. She co-taught the Sunday school class that Elsie Menard also attended, known as the Open Door class. And she served in a variety of leadership capacities in our congregation. When I returned to Central in 2010 to begin shared ministry with you, Bonnie was the chair of the Stretch Committee, which had formed to discover a new mission and vision for Central Christian Church. Our mission slogan, growing in our faith and our understanding, touching lives with love and sharing our gifts within and beyond the congregation, was developed by the Stretch Committee under Bonnie's leadership back then. And as we moved forward with the Vision Leadership Team, Bonnie was a quiet supporter of the transformation process, even if she didn't necessarily agree with everything that we came up with. She didn't hold back from telling you that either, but she was a supporter of the vision and mission and ministry of this church. I remember visiting with Bonnie and her husband Lauren in 2013, the day the moving company had come to take their belongings to Minnesota so that they could be close to their daughter Jill and her family. The house was empty. Bonnie's health had been failing, and she was tired. But nevertheless, in the kitchen, she encouraged me again to stay true to the gospel with patience. To stay true to the gospel with patience. She ministered to me. I had come to minister to them one last time. She ministered to me as she had done from 5th grade forward. She dropped in her last 2 cents, as it were, giving all she had. These generous servants were not perfect. They were human like you and me. The grace of God made known in Jesus Christ granted them the opportunity to give all they had in life. They are saints of this congregation who have rested eternally with God. The hope we all have for ourselves when we have finished our race. When we have reached heaven's shores, will those who remember us say that we gave all that we had for Christ's church, that we encouraged them and others through our generosity of our time, our abilities, and our money to be fully devoted disciples? Will your legacy be a blessing for others, perhaps for future generations in our community? This is a true time of decision, choosing our path as we seek God's peaceful will for our lives, for our church, and indeed for the world. So I invite you today to begin prayerfully considering how you will hear the call of Christ in your life in the days and months ahead. How will you support the mission and ministry of Christ's church with your time, with your abilities, and with your money? Every day, we are bombarded by requests and opportunities to give to charities and organizations doing good in our world. And some of those requests are made by organizations that frankly sit on millions and millions and millions of dollars all the time. Well, one thing that I can assure you is that this organization, this community of faith, does not sit on millions and millions of dollars. At our board meeting yesterday, we celebrated the fact that at the end of October, there was $633 in the general fund. Many of you participate in fundraisers for good causes locally and globally, in person and online, and that is truly great. It is truly great. And as we look to 2019 and our 126th year as a congregation, everyone's contributions and efforts are vital to our ability to continue to be a witness for Christ in our community. As one who knocked on doors to raise funds to build this space over 30 years ago as a teenager, I'm not afraid to ask you to be generous servants of God at Central Christian Church. I've had doors slammed in my face before for asking. And with grace and love, with the peace and joy that the saints of Central Christian Church have demonstrated in their living and inspired me and many others to be fully devoted disciples, I'll keep challenging and encouraging all of us to do our best for the glory of God. Because that's what I learned from Elsie and Bonnie and a great cloud of witnesses who surround us in this very room yet today. Amen.